the executive, legislative, and judicial arms of government are continually synergizing with each other to put in place the economic mechanisms to properly reposition the nation's economy for effectiveness and efficiency. The Ninth House of Representatives, in its legislative agenda, clearly identified as priority to conduct a review of all federal laws or federal tax laws that encourage investments, incentive enterprise, ensure fairness, curb tax avoidance and evasion through the use of ICT in tax collection and administration. As established in the Ninth House of Representatives legislative agenda, the priority economic strategy goals for the House of Representatives include creation of an inclusive, thriving, and resilient economy for Nigerians, attainment of substantial reduction in the percentage of poor and unemployed Nigerians. Above backdrop, the executive arm of government, in the bid to properly position the economic fortune of this country, initiated the 2020 Finance Bill with a view to amending selected legislations, namely capital gain tax, company income tax, industrial development tax, personal income tax, tertiary education trust fund, customs and excise duties, tariff, value-added tax, stamp duties, electronic transaction levy, FRS Establishment Act, Nigerian Ports Export Processing Zone Authority, Oil and Gas Export Processing Act, Crisis Intervention Act, Unclaimed Funds Trust Fund, Companies and Allied Matters Act, introduced tax incentives for investments in infrastructure and capital markets, support small businesses in line with ongoing ease of doing business reforms, and raise revenue for the government by various fiscal measures. We hereby implore stakeholders and the general public to assist us by making the necessary inputs that will enable us pass into law, that will enable us pass this bill in the interest of the nation's economy and the generality of the Nigerian people. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, distinguished members, honorable minister and her team, our esteemed invited guests, and gentlemen of the press, I welcome you to this public hearing on the 2020 Finance Bill. May God help you. Thank you very much.
Can we please jam our hands again together for the chairman? At this point, we've arrived at the high point of today's event with the opening remarks from a man of dependable characteristics who understands its goal, interests, and special commitment to the Nigerian project. This he has demonstrated with his sudden appearance at this very all-important public hearing. The Speaker, House of Representatives, Right Honorable Femi Gbaja, Your Excellency, Mr. Speaker. Please be seated.
The chairman of this great and very important committee, the deputy chairman, my very esteemed colleagues, let me risk this by saying even more esteemed guests, Honorable Minister of Finance, Minister for State Budget and Planning, and all distinguished guests here, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to stand on existing protocol. Let me, first of all, apologize for the delay or keeping you waiting if I did that. It's no sign of disrespect at all. It's just one of those crazy Fridays but happened to have, I had to be in 100 places at the same time. But with that, I still insisted that rather than send somebody to represent me here, it was important that I came myself because of the importance of what we're discussing. I think before I go into this, it's very important that I state that this bill was only presented to the House just barely about a week ago. And because of the commitment that House as a whole and the committee in particular had for the speedy passage of this bill. Ordinarily, the process of bill passage, this would take, at least for thoroughness, a few months. But because of the importance and the need for speedy passage, we had to sit down with the committee as well, looked at all the issues, the intricacies, and we decided that in spite of the fact that the bill just came, we would give it speedy passage, but not at the risk of sacrificing thoroughness. So this is going to be considered thoroughly, but the committee is going to work day and night to make sure it meets the deadline we have agreed to. So I want to commend the committee for your commitment and your dedication to duty. The chairman of the committee has addressed most of the granular details and the issues involved. Mine is just to give an overview or welcome remarks, which I will proceed to do. So once again, I say good morning and thank you all for being here today. The finance bill which we have gathered here to consider and to contribute to will determine, amongst other things, our ability as a nation to fund the 2021 budget, meet the obligations of government, and implement policies to build infrastructure, address the problem of insecurity, grow the economy, provide jobs that pay a living wage, and lift families out of poverty. It is an important piece of legislation deserving of thorough consideration and reasoned debate by the Parliament of the people, acting in the best interests of the people. We have a responsibility as legislators to meticulously review and examine every aspect of this bill to ensure that we produce a legislative document that is clear in its objective, thoughtful in the mandate it imposes, and reflective of the best aspirations of all our citizens. This public hearing moves us closer to that laudable objective by providing an opportunity for citizens and legislators to jointly consider the contents of the bill. It is expected that over the course of this public hearing, citizens will advance ideas and make recommendations that will improve the quality of the legislation and ensure the varied interests and considerations of all Nigerians are taken into view before final enactment into law of this essential legislation. However, for this interaction between legislators, stakeholders, and citizens generally, on whose behalf we serve to yield good fruit, all of us must take extra care that the contributions we make here today are determined not by narrow considerations or personal or group interests, but really in the best interests of the majority of our people and the pursuit of a more peaceful, prosperous, and more economically society. We must also remember that the proper operation of democracy requires that people be willing to listen to and hear each other, especially when they disagree. Let us remember also that whether or not people listen to what you have to say depends not only on the content of your message, but also on the manner you choose to deliver it. And following therefrom, ensure that we observe decorum and treat each other fairly in the manner of our contributions. I thank all of you who have gathered to participate in this public hearing. Your presence here is an act of the highest patriotism for which your country owes you a debt of gratitude. I thank the chairman, the deputy chairman, members of the Committee on Finance for ensuring fidelity to the constitutional requirement and to their diligent work on this bill thus far. I also want to thank the stakeholders, particularly the Ministry of Finance and the Minister and Budget and Planning, and all those who have worked night and day to put this together before sending it to the National Assembly. Thank you for the work that you do. We appreciate it, and we hope that we'll continue to work in unison together for the good of our country. I wish you all successful deliberations, and I declare this public hearing open. God bless you, and God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
We are on live to GTV Africa from National Assembly, and the speaker just declared the event open.
A patriotic Nigerian, a legislator par excellence, who has helped Nigeria and the legislature climb to one step in the ladder of process with his leadership acumen. Please, can we jam our hands together again for the speaker? At this point, I will humbly invite for a message of goodwill or remarks the Honorable Minister of Finance, Ajia Zainab Samsuna Ahmed. You're welcome, Honorable Minister.
As you are aware, the Minister of Finance and the Minister of State is also present at the event. The Minister of Finance is the one to talk, and we listen to her to hear what she is going to tell us.
The Right Honorable Speaker of the House of Reps, Excellency Gbaja.
So surprising to see.
I always mix it up. Gbaja.
You can see the wonders in the House of Reps. The minister is trying to learn how to coordinate.
Leader of the House of Reps.
It's part of the comic that comes in a function, especially in a public function like this.
The Deputy Chairman, House Committee on Finance, honorable members of the House of Reps that are here today, the Honorable Minister of State, Budget and National Planning, Permanent Secretary, Special Duties of the Ministry, Senior Special Advisor to Economic Matters to the President, Chairman FRS, and other heads of agencies that are here, key stakeholders, participants, members of the press, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by conveying our gratitude to the House of Reps for the opportunity of this public hearing on the Finance Bill 2020, but also gratitude for the outstanding support that we have been getting from the 9th Assembly. We value this support and we do not take it for granted. Right Honorable Speaker, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, you recall that His Excellency the President, in conveying the 2021 budget, had indicated that in line with the tradition that was established last year, that the Finance Minister will prepare annual bills to support the federal government's annual budget. So the responsibility that I've been tasked with, as supported by a number of laws, which includes the Finance Control and Management Act and the FRS Establishment and Management Act, but also some specific responsibilities provided for in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So it is in line with these responsibilities that we went ahead to draft the finance bill, which is prepared to support the 2021 budget of economic recovery and resilience. In carrying out this mandate, we had set up the Fiscal Policy Reform Committee, which is chaired by the Senior Special Advisor to the President on Economic Matters, Dr. Adeyemi Dikolu, and also co-chaired by Senior Special Advisor to the President on Finance and Economy, Dr. Sarah Alade, and other key stakeholders and MDAs that are also part of this committee. The Fiscal Policy Reform Committee has worked to draft this bill, and we have had to conduct a number of consultations. In total, we had participants up to 1,740 representing professional bodies, academics, international development partners, youth organizations, civil society organizations, the private sector, as well as key federal ministries, departments, and agencies. We also took this draft bill to the Federal Executive Council and to the National Economic Council, where all the state governors also had a view of this bill and we took their input. So the key principles that guided the preparation of this finance bill is that we need to adopt a counter-cyclical fiscal policy, a critical counter-cyclical policy, because we need to be able to adequately respond to the current economic challenges that is occasioned by the COVID-19 and the crash in crude oil prices. We also need to defer tax rate increases till the domestic economy sufficiently recovers. We needed to reduce the tax compliance burden on taxpayers in line with our commitment to the ease of doing business reforms. Second principle for us is we need to reform fiscal incentives to help us to reduce proliferation of fiscal incentives by carefully assessing the cost versus the benefit of these incentives. We also needed to prioritize job creation, to enhance growth and investments, and also to reduce taxes where possible. The third principle for us was to ensure that there's closer coordination between the monetary authorities, the trade authorities, as well as the fiscal authorities. And this is necessary for us to be able to align existing tax incentives for lending to agriculture sector with some of the recent moratorium that has been provided by the CBN on interest and principal repayments. We also needed to reform the tax duty levy on banking transactions and also make specific provisions that would help us harness funds in the form of unclaimed dividends and unclaimed bank balances that have been sitting idle. Right Honorable Speaker and distinguished participants, I want to remind us that in the Finance Act 2019, that when we presented the bill which you passed into law, that the bill had 5 major thematic areas. One is promoting fiscal equity, which has been eloquently elucidated in the speech of the Right Honorable Speaker. And we did this by removing the double taxation on companies during commencement and cessation, simplification for the basis of calculation of minimum tax, exemption of profits that have been taxed from further taxation in the form of excess dividend tax. Second thematic area of 2019 Finance Bill is aligning domestic laws with global best practice. Third area is introducing tax incentives for infrastructure and capital markets. And fourth is supporting small, medium businesses. And this we did by the exemption of the smallest businesses from paying tax, so that Companies that are medium size had a reduced tax rate from 30% to 20%, while the smallest businesses are paying have zero company income tax altogether. We also have had to review the tax burden compliance for those small businesses so that it's easier for them to do their business. We also had the fifth thematic area is to increase revenue for government. So you recall that we increased the VAT rate from 5% to 7.5%. We also introduced legislative backing for banks to charge stamp duties on electronic transactions. So why Finance Bill 2020? One, because the President said we must always have Finance Bill to support the national budget, but there are also economic imperatives as to why this bill also needed to be presented. The Finance Bill introduced in 2019 has principles that need to be extended in the Finance Bill 2020. That the same principles of making incremental changes to our tax, excise, and other fiscal laws to support the annual budgets, to implement fiscal policies in line with the multi-year expenditure framework and the fiscal strategy paper MTEP-FSP, as well as to support other reforms that are needed to improve the ease of doing business. Over time, we hope this process will result in transformative changes to Nigerian fiscal laws and jurisprudence. There are also some key drivers for this Finance Bill 2020. The Fiscal Policy Reform Committee that we mandated to prepare this draft bill was asked to ensure that there is a balance between broader macroeconomic strategies to attract investments, to grow the economy, to create jobs, as well as the immediate fiscal strategies that are needed to accelerate domestic revenue mobilization in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and also the recent economic downturn. What we don't have in the Finance Bill 2020 is increases in taxes. So there are no taxes that are no new taxes that are introduced in this bill, and also there is no increases in taxes. And also there are no incentives that are introduced in this bill. The tax reforms that we have introduced are put there to support financial stimulus, and also tax measures are also designed to be short and really focused to support the immediate reforms that we require. Your Excellency, in enacting this, in drafting this finance bill, we had worked on 5 broad thematic areas. One of them, as I said earlier on, is enacting provisions that support our counter-cyclical measures and crisis intervention initiatives. We have therefore made provision to create a legal framework for the creation of a crisis intervention fund. So that's one of the proposals that we have. We also introduced provisions to allow for the recovery of donations made towards the pandemic and other potential crises that might arise in the future. We have made second thematic area for us is fiscal relief for mass transit. Fiscal relief for mass transit. What we've done is we made some provisions for fiscal support to mass transit by reviewing the duties regime for the transportation sector, targeting motor vehicles, buses, and trucks. We also made the third thematic area is procurement reforms, amending some of the Public Procurement Act provisions to enhance the procurement process. The fourth thematic area is tax and fiscal responsibility. We have proposed some key amendments to tax legislations to enhance tax reforms and tax administration. We've also made some provisions to amend. We also made some provisions to amend financial reporting and other fiscal rules for companies operating in the free trade zone. We've introduced business reforms for prosperity with further ease tax burden and tax compliance. So I will just take a few of these reforms that are provided in this bill to set the tone for the discussion. The capital gains tax, Section 36, has provisions for personal injury. We are proposing that we clarify that only the compensation for loss of office up to 10 million will be taxed, and also to clarify that employers will be responsible for the deduction and accounting of the applicable taxes. The personal income tax, Section 6, provision on businesses or trade only partially carried out or deemed out in Nigeria. We have introduced a provision for special economic presence rules under Personal Income Tax Act to align the provisions of PITA on the taxation of non-residents with those contained in the Company Income Tax Act as amended in the Finance Act of 2019. Again, on the personal income tax, in the third schedule, we have proposed a provision to exempt persons that are earning minimum wage from paying personal income tax. That is to say that in the light of the current economic situation, our proposal is that persons who earn the minimum wage should be exempted from paying personal income tax. We made some proposals to amend the Customs and Excise Tariff Consolidation Act. Specifically, the proposal is to delete the exemption from excise duties on imported goods manufactured locally. You recall that in the Finance Act 2019, we had provisions that exempted imported goods of a type not produced locally from excise duties, which created ambiguities in application of the provision, as certain luxury items, for example, alcoholic beverages, would inadvertently fall outside the purview of these excise duties. So the Finance Bill is seeking to correct this ambiguity. Under the Company Income Tax, Section 39, on gas utilization, we are proposing to clarify the companies downstream that qualify for gas utilization incentive under CETA, and also to prevent double dipping by way of incentive claims in respect of the same qualifying expenditure incurred under CETA and the Petroleum Profit Tax Act. Under the Value-Added Tax, Section 46, specifically on interpretation, we have made a proposal to expand the definition of basic food items to include animal feeds. So animal feeds was previously not included in the exemption, list of exemption items for VAT. Under the Company Income Tax, and also on the provision in Section 11 on charge of tax, we are proposing to streamline the application of the incentives to bank that provide financing for primary agricultural production. Under the Industrial Development Income Tax Relief Act, IDITRA, Section 46, specifically the list of pioneer industries, we are making a proposal to clarify the categories of agricultural businesses covered under pioneer incentives. Again, under the Company's Income Tax Schedule number 2, we're making a proposal to introduce software as qualifying capital expenditure. Why we're making this proposal is because of the changing business realities. It has become mandatory that the tax laws are amended to allow for recovery of capital expenditure made by way of software acquisition and development costs in the form of capital allowances. Under the Company Income Tax Act, Section 23 on profit exempt, we are making a proposal to clarify the pass-through status of real estate investment companies, ROICOs. The Finance Act 2019 introduced tax framework that granted ROICOs a pass-through status, making real estate investment in ROICOs more viable. But the Finance Bill 2020 is looking at augmenting this provision, certain provisions of CETA, to clarify the tax-neutral status of ROICOs. The Tertiary Education Establishment Act, Section 1, the imposition of education tax. We're making a proposal to exempt small companies from tertiary education tax. These are companies that are now exempted from paying company income tax. What we're proposing is a further exemption of these small businesses from paying education tax. Under the Company Income Tax, Section 17, on authorized unit trust, we're making proposals to minimize the incidence of double taxation in collective investment schemes. Again, under the company income tax or minimum tax, we are making percent to 0.25% of gross turnover for the financial year ending 1st January 2021 to 31st January 2021. So this is just a one-year stimulus provision. And also, under the Federal Inland Revenue Service Act, we are proposing to introduce legislation for general administration to also introduce penalties for breach of taxpayers' confidentiality by officials of the service. Running up again to still on the company income tax, we have made some specific provisions relating to the stamp duties as provided for in Section 89 of the Act. The provision that we're making is to expunge stamp duties on electronic transactions and create a separate framework for taxation of electronic receipts. As part of the gradual evolution of the stamp duties framework, it is recommended that the charge levied on electronic receipts from commercial banks is removed from the Stamp Duties Act and reintroduced as a separate electronic money transfer levy under the supervision of the Central Bank of Nigeria. It is important to note that the electronic money transfer levy is not intended to be a new levy, so it's the same levy that exists now. The VAT Act, the rate charge of the VAT Act, the effective rate of the 7.5% increase is provided for as 1st of January 2020. This is already taking effect, it's just to codify it. Again, on the company income tax, provisions for deductibility of deductions. Section 25, we are proposing to provide a framework for recovery of donations made towards COVID-19 pandemic and for future existences of this nature. The proposal is intended to grant tax relief to companies that donated to the government on the COVID-19 relief fund. Such relief is expected to serve as an acknowledgement of positive taxpayer behavior and encourage such behavior in the case of future exigencies of this nature. Let me move on to the provisions that we are proposing and the Gas Export Processing Zone Act, Sections 8 and 18. We are proposing that we need to provide a framework for filing of tax returns for companies that are operating in these export-free zones, and also to provide a 75% minimum export threshold as a condition for enjoying tax incentives within the zone. The NEFTA Act, by exempting approved enterprises from tax filing, which created the opportunity for arbitrage, approved enterprises sell within the non-export zone area, which we call the customs territory, at no tax cost, thereby creating unfair competitive advantage to legitimate businesses operating within the customs territory. The proposal is that we will seek to change this to provide an incentive for those companies in the export-free zone to actually export and earn alternative foreign exchange for the country. Right, Honorable Speaker, honorable members, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we've also made a provision for the creation of a crisis intervention fund. In the case of crises like the COVID-19, a standing fund that is provided by law to enable us to respond very quickly. Under the Companies and Allied Matters Act, we have also made provisions on dividends and balanced trust fund. The creation of an unclaimed dividend and a bank balances trust fund within the dividend declared and will be warehoused as a perpetual trust to the shareholders. This is a proposal that such unclaimed dividends should be handed over to the government as a trustee in a perpetual fund created under the supervision of the Central Bank and the Debt Management Office and also other agencies that the Act may specify, with the private sector involvement in the governance of the fund. The liability to the shareholders of the fund will no longer be extinguished under 12 years as currently provided by CAMA, but will be held in trust and be claimable at any time proof is made of the fund that was previously unclaimed. We also have some provisions to amend the Fiscal Responsibility Act to align Section 12 of the FRA to Section 59 and Section 306 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended, to enable the federal government of Nigeria, where conditions warrant due to occurrences of emergencies such as the pandemic, to enable the federal government to exceed the deficit to GDP ratio threshold that is provided for in Section 12, subsection of the FRA. We also have some provisions to modify some key provisions of the Public Procurement Act of 2007, and the essence is to improve the procurement processes and enhance our efforts to reform the economy. So let me conclude by saying that there are 4 major priority reforms that are in this bill. The first one is the reform to the Customs and Excise Tariff Act, which is the proposal to provide fiscal support for mass transit by reviewing import duties and levies down, is to revamp the Stamp Duties Act, and the proposal is to not include a tax but change it from the Stamp Duties Act to a new legislation at the present time. The third major reform is the alignment of the company income tax and the capital gains tax rates. The proposal is to align these rates to eliminate the arbitrage that currently exists that are being taken advantage of these two taxes. And fourthly, finally, is the key provisions that have been made to address federal issues that would enable the division of taxation power of bank transfers and alienation of interest on real estate, and also the elimination of arbitrage in several opportunities that I have introduced earlier on. This list is not exhaustive. We're happy that we have this opportunity to engage with stakeholders, and also that there will be other finance bills in subsequent years that would be able to take and are not able to pass into this particular. Right, Honorable Speaker, honorable members, thank you very much, and participants for your kind attention.
Can we please jam our hands again together for the Honorable Minister? As soon as the Honorable Minister mentioned that it's a response to the current economic challenge of COVID-19, it dawned on me the reason why the Speaker made sure he's present in this program, because that also tallies with the 9th House of Representatives legislative agenda. On this note, may I humbly invite for the vote of thanks the Deputy Chairman, House Committee on Finance, Honorable Saidu Musa Abdullahi.
Thank you. His Excellency, the Right Honorable Speaker, the Speaker of the Nigerian people, the leader of the voices of the people of Nigeria, the Deputy Leader of the House, Chairman, House Committee on Finance, our colleague Chairman, honorable colleagues, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, and our team, the Chairman of FIRS, and other critical stakeholders here present. I beg to stand on already established protocols. Let me start by acknowledging the support and the contribution of the Right Honorable Speaker to the seamless functioning of the operations of the House Committee on Finance. Indeed, your support has served as an inspiration to members of the committee. The workaholic nature of our chairman,
I'm sure you
who, in spite of the tightness of and cruciality of this time, has never won in terms of ensuring that we meet the deadlines given on any assignment.
And on our Facebook.
I also wish to appreciate the Honorable Minister and members of the Fiscal Policy Reform Committee for an untiring effort in seeing that our laws are reflective of the challenges of the present time. Indeed, the global economy and Nigerian economy, not being in isolation, is facing a very, very tough and difficult times. And of course, that naturally should lead us to make our laws even more dynamic. I'm sure this depth of work which she has entered will point to the fact that we are really serious in addressing the challenges that we are facing as a result of COVID and the economic downturn that we are presently experiencing. This is a singular opportunity for critical stakeholders to make their input into even making the document more rich and more reflective of our present-day realities. So I invite the general public to make input, to come up with input that will add value to the document. Let's make it as interactive as possible so as to be able to meet the yearnings and aspirations of our countrymen. So finally, I'm sure at the end of the day, we'll have a document that we'll all be proud of. So thank you so much all for taking time to be with us.
On this note, with the permission of the Honorable Speaker, we'll draw the curtain for the opening section of this public hearing. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, considering the importance of this event, may I crave your